Awesome. Thank y'all. So I recognize I'm kind of the odd man out here. No science in this. Don't worry. Just sit back and listen to a kind of unique story. But yeah, I work for North Carolina Marine Fisheries. We have one thing that's kind of come up that I think was really interesting and a great way to show that us on the regulatory side are also trying to make room for market adaptations and things like that. So I'm going to cover flounder ponds in North Carolina. So a little background, these apparently started as early as the 1980s, and so that's in Cedar Island, North Carolina. If you look at this midway of our coastline, there's Big Pamlico Sound. We're dealing with that spot right there. It's the last stretch of land before you take the ferry over to Aquaculture, so if anybody's been through it, they probably didn't notice. Very small, tight-knit community, gorgeous area, very secretive community. They really like, it's all old families. So the goals of these flounder ponds, so they would go out and catch wild harvest southern flounder in the estuaries, and then part of the goal for some of them was to ride out the price drop from the flooded market. Another one was to potentially sell to the live market. So this is Paralictes lethostigma, southern flounder, which is managed statewide in those inshore areas, separate from the summer flounder out in the ocean. So that became apparently a bit more popular in the 90s and early 2000s. But the division, our division, had very limited knowledge on this. There was understanding of maybe some kind of short-term holding tanks to get to the live market processors. So that led to a live trip ticket condition, and that was about it. And so DMF rules, everybody loves rules, so let's go over that real quick. Aquaculture wasn't defined until the end of '91, and it was controlling a factor that's on a list of factors. So predation protection, water flow, things like that that fits aquaculture. So these ponds would have applied. Now, that wasn't addressed, maybe wasn't known beyond just the short-term live sale. And then that knowledge in the division was eventually lost, primarily employee turnover, retirement. So then go to 2022. So we've had shortened wild harvest flounder seasons in North Carolina since 2019. That's as a part of the fisheries management plan. That was a big push, and shortened means a month for recreational and a quota for commercial, which is supposed to be a month, ends up being most of the time more like 5 to 15 days because they operate so quickly. So we were tipped off by a quota monitoring issue. So quota monitoring is the daily reporting of your catch that a dealer has to do once they've gotten it from the fisher. And so somebody said a month and a half after the closure of the commercial industry or the commercial season, they said, how do I report all the fish in the pond? And we said, what pond? And so we realized, the Marine Patrol, our officers realized that met the definition of aquaculture, was unpermitted, and so that, unfortunately, that operation had to be shut down and all those flounder seized. And that was right there, about 2,000 pounds of flounder. And so we had discussions with APHIS and NC Food and Drug Protection to say, hey, is there any way we can donate these fish? Can we test them to see if it's safe for people to eat? And unfortunately, there wasn't a way to test post hoc without knowing everything about that operation, water source, et cetera. Because the one that was shut down was effectively a hole dug in a backyard with a tarp over it, with inflow and outflow from a ditch. So not the best idea for us to just give away that and then be liable. But that brought up the question of if it had to be shut down for a lack of permit, then we have to find a way to permit it. And so we came up with a bunch of concerns. The major ones I'll cover is first quota monitoring, as I mentioned, discharge and waste, and then environmental contamination, as I just kind of highlighted. So first off, quota monitoring, the problem here was that, of course, our commercial season is regulated by that quota. And so we get that daily reporting to figure out how close we are to the quota and then cut down more efficient gears as we get closer and closer. And so that's then monthly by trip ticket from the dealers. But that is obviously way too late for us to really manage successfully without going way over our quota. So that limited season has to be managed daily. And so the flounders that are in ponds are caught almost exclusively with pound nets, which at least allows for a more passive gear, a less stress on the fish. And also the tricky part with that is that those pound nets are open closer to meeting that quota because they don't catch quite as many. But if we're not collecting what's going into ponds from those flounder pounds, then yeah, it's confusing. Then we can easily go over our quota without intending to. And so solutions, the permit for a pond has to be held by a flounder dealer. So they would be reporting that. They have to be weighed and reported daily. So you can see this gorgeous setup. They are set up right by one of the big bays in Cedar Island. They have a little slip. And then they had to create a weigh station. So they basically bring their vessel in with bubbler tanks with the flounder in them, transfer them into fish boxes, weigh them, and then that is the point of sale. So they are effectively selling it to the dealer, which is almost always either a partner or themselves. But the sale that we manage is that movement into the pond. And then any sale after that, we don't have to have reported, as long as you're filling out your trip tickets as well, with a little more fine-tuned information. We can still manage that part. So that part was checked off. Next, we got discharge and waste. So we got problems. Ponds are continuous flow-through systems. And now, obviously, the inflow-outflow is filtered, but there's concerns there. You have potential mortality from capture stress, which, as I said, is mitigated a bit from using pound nets, but there's still an option. And so how do you deal with the carcasses? And then you have high stocking density. So it's hard to see, but there's a bunch of flounder in that corner, and they're stacked 5-6 fish high. This one was about a 50 by 20 pond, and it was stocked full of 11,000 pounds of flounder. So they really shove them in there. They don't feed them. It's a stasis kind of thing. So there's not as much waste to deal with, but it is a totally new variation of stuff that we had to kind of look through. So solutions, thankfully, no matter what, I guess NPDES, if it doesn't reach the 100,000 pound mark, it's not a concern from that side. So as far as the discharge goes, especially into these big bays, there's not as much of a concern of additional permitting for that. And then we were able to work with our Division of Waste Management to get to a different permitted site that was nearby. The closest landfill that they could potentially take flounder to if they had a huge mortality event is 2.5 hours away. This is a very secluded area, and it was all the way out and back around to get to that spot. So we worked with them to find a permitted site in Cedar Island that was local to them that we could trust. If they do have mortality, they're going to bring them there instead of just throwing them in the woods. And we have to go try and catch them. And the concern with that is obviously you want to prevent any of the large amount of fish from getting into aquifers or affecting the water source. This is all well-sourced water areas, so everybody's pulling from a well. It's low-lying area, so there are potential big concerns if you had all 11,000 pounds die and you're going to throw it in the spot. So then we have environmental contamination. That was the biggest piece we had to look at. And so one of the biggest problems that really got highlighted in this is our Food and Drug Protection Division, which is basically the state version of pulling the federal requirements. They manage and oversee retail seafood processors. So if you touch the fish with a knife and it's going to retail, then they're managing that. And so you have to have HACCP plans and all those pieces. But there's no dealer requirements from us, to get a flounder dealer's license. And so there's a bit of a gap there because those dealers can sell to processors. They can sell to especially retail processors, but they can also sell to individuals to the point where we had people in our office who knew people and would go down and pick up a flounder off of their pond, never told us about it. So that doesn't help. And considering flounder can be potentially sushi grade, that's another concern there. And so there's also no safety requirements to prevent chemical or bacterial contamination. And so that's one big thing that we had to make sure is you would kind of apply that HACCP plan, but a processor, especially if they're selling to live markets in New York, is not necessarily coming and checking in on this flounder pond continuously. They're going to come and make a purchase and go. And so one solution is kind of broadly to base some HACCP requirements into the aquaculture permit they're going to receive. And so a little more specifics, we have the permit requirements. The way we did that is by looking at our ongoing shoreline survey for shellfish sanitation. We actually just had them pick those two sites to do their survey that they're already going to do for Cedar Island. And they're looking for potential chemical or bacteriological concerns. So they're looking at places that might have septic runoff or might have some kind of chemical spill or marina, something like that, to see if that's a concern. If there was a potential contaminant, then the applicant would have to do water testing, which is separate from us. They'd have to pay for it. It's a couple $100, which is obviously not nothing for these kind of operations, but you're talking about the potential of making several $1,000s more than you would have. So it's not a huge deal, and they were okay with it. And then you had to we required chemical barrier and usage restrictions. So These are dug out or elevated, and then you had to have some kind of tarp and prevention of runoff going into that, as well as a restriction of any chemical usage near the water source or around that pond. And so that also kind of helped fit in with the escapement requirements, which already are considered within permits. But some quick results, it's not a huge deal, but there were 2 flounder ponds permitted. And so, as I mentioned, we had, and there's a few of those flounder swimming around. They had 1 pond with 11,000 pounds, one with 8,500 pounds. That doesn't sound like much, especially for y'all's scale of things, but those are commercial fishers who have struggled in this area, who have brought stuff to us and are willing to work with us, and that they were able to take 11,000 and 8,500 pounds that if they sold in the flooded market would get about $1 a pound. Because they were able to either wait or sell to the live market, the waiting got them somewhere between $4 and $5 a pound, and the live market gets them closer to $5 to $6 a pound. And so you're talking about small-scale commercial fishermen who have struggled and were able to make a small season that they still abided by and worked well through and were willing to listen to us and work with us, get a huge pay out of the same thing and promote kind of North Carolina as a specific fun situation. So just, if nothing else, take that us on the regulatory side are working to adapt to these new markets that y'all are coming up with. And so, I mean, reach out to your regulators and work out for this stuff. So that's all I got. If you got any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see more people getting into it is one question, and then I'm really curious about specific geographic markets. Are they mostly selling these locally live? Are they hauling some to New York? And if so, or farther, are they hauling them themselves? Are they contracting other wholesaler live haulers? I'm interested in kind of a little bit more of those kind of things.
Yeah, so to answer your first question, from what we've been told, now this is all new knowledge, there was a point where there were 40 separate operations in Cedar Island alone and potentially around other parts of Pamlico Sound, which are a lot of remote areas. So there is potential there. And really just the way commercial fishing has gone, a lot of those like pound nets that people would pull from have now been absorbed by one of the people or more of them that are doing this. The second question is a lot of it's local when they're just regular harvest flounder, where they just kill them afterwards. But the live market is a deal they've brokered with New York and I want to say maybe Pennsylvania dealers or processors that they actually come down and fill up a tank or fill up a truck and send them up.
Do you think there's interest in other species in addition to flounder?
There has been, like the same and other people have reached out about red drum, harvesting red drum. That's a little trickier. So we've entertained the ideas of looking into those, but it's a lot easier with something like flounder where you can hold them in stasis and they're just going to sit there pissed, but they're fine. Whereas red drum, it's going to take a bit more work.
And about how long, I'm sorry I'm dominating, but how much time do they spend in these before they're able to sell them when the market recovers?
So,
weeks or months?
What I was told now, when the last I checked, early January, they still each had 1,000 to 2,000 pounds left in there. The longest I've been told that they had previously held them was from the season in October until Valentine's Day.
So if anybody else has a question, we have time for maybe one more. Ken?
Yeah.
So, thanks for showing something from down east and down low.
Yep.
This is really, really important to our commercial fishing community, and it's a great tie for the social license that could mean for other parts of aquaculture connecting with commercial fishing. So, to share that easy. Just curious with watching like the mullet FMP that's going through and all the other kind of changes that are happening in marine fisheries in North Carolina. Does this have any rollover to like bait and applications for like bait shops and permits required for bait? That kind of thing, since that's still a wild caught fishery as well.
Yeah, so we're actually working with somebody right now who wants to do the same thing, wants to do precisely what you're asking with cinnamon river shrimp with macrobrachium species. So we're evaluating if they can actually find the endemic one, because none of our specialists can find the endemic one. They can just find the invasive. But yeah, that is potential. And there's people who are seeming to be interested in collecting and then culturing ballyhoo and other bait fish like that. So that's certainly next steps potential potential down the road for us.
All right, well,
And I'll share my, our first flounder broodstock from Harbor Branch Fishing and Graphic came from Moon Parks operations.
Perfect.
North Carolina flounders using the ponds went all the way down to Virginia.
all right.
That's great.
Well, thank you very much.